In 2000, Julie Andrews lost her voice forever during routine surgery. 24 years later, a woman with voice problems asked her a simple question: how did you survive? Julie's answer about wanting to end her life shocked Jimmy Fallon into silence. The Tonight Show studio was alive with its signature Tuesday evening energy in Manhattan. The familiar blue and gold lighting created that warm, electric atmosphere that had made the show a late-night institution for decades. Julie Andrews sat across from Jimmy Fallon, both engaged in what appeared to be a typical celebrity interview about her legendary career and recent projects. The Roots had just finished their smooth musical transition, and the cameras were rolling hot. Jimmy's iconic curved desk gleamed under the professional studio lights, while the New York City skyline sparkled through the backdrop windows like a constellation of Broadway dreams and Hollywood magic. Julie looked every inch the beloved icon she had become. At 90, she still possessed that unmistakable grace and dignified presence that had captivated audiences for over 7 decades, though now seasoned with the wisdom and depth that came from a lifetime of bringing joy to millions while facing profound personal challenges. Dressed in an elegant lavender blouse with her silver hair styled perfectly, she radiated the same gentle authenticity that had made her one of entertainment's most cherished figures. "So Julie," Jimmy said, his animated gestures punctuating every word, "at 90 years old, you're still a force in entertainment. The Sound of Music, Mary Poppins, Shrek. You've created characters that have become part of our cultural DNA. When you look back at this incredible legacy, what brings you the most joy?" Julie's eyes held that characteristic blend of warmth and thoughtful intelligence. "Well, Jimmy, I think what I'm most grateful for is that the work has outlasted me, if you will. These characters, these songs, they've become part of people's lives in ways I never could have imagined when I was recording them." The audience was clearly moved by her presence and humility. Several older fans in the front rows, wiping away tears at simply being in the same room as this living legend. And those songs, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, do-re-mi, a spoonful of sugar, they're timeless, Jimmy continued with obvious reverence. Your voice was such a gift, the clarity, the range, the way it could convey pure joy. How do you reflect on that incredible instrument you were blessed with? Julie's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something flickering across her features, not the polished performer's smile, but something more complex, tinged with loss and hard-won acceptance. My voice was, well, it was everything to me, Jimmy. For most of my life, it was how I understood myself, how I connected with the world. The conversation was flowing naturally, touching on her early stage career, her breakthrough in Broadway musicals, and how she had transitioned from live performance to film and eventually voice acting. The studio audience was completely engaged, hanging on every word from one of entertainment's most respected artists. "I have to ask about something that I know was incredibly difficult," Jimmy said with obvious sensitivity. "In the late 1990s, you underwent surgery that affected your voice. That must have been devastating for someone whose entire identity was built around singing. How did you process such a profound change?" Julie paused for a long moment, her hands folding carefully in her lap. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more reflective. It was the end of everything I thought I knew about myself, Jimmy. When you've been singing since you were a child, when your voice is how you've always expressed joy, love, storytelling, losing that is like losing your native language. It was in this moment of reflection about loss and identity that a voice from the audience cut through the studio atmosphere with the raw vulnerability and desperation of someone facing their own devastating change. "Miss Andrews?" Both Julie and Jimmy turned toward the sound. In the 4th row, center section, an older woman in her late 70s was standing among the seated audience members. She had graying hair and wore a simple navy cardigan, but her posture suggested someone who had once commanded attention through performance. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue, and her eyes were already filled with tears. "Yes, dear," Julie responded immediately, her voice carrying the maternal warmth and compassion that had made her beloved across generations. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "My name is Margaret," the woman replied, her voice shaky but determined. "Margaret Thompson. I was a choir director for 40 years, and I've been losing my voice to age. I can barely whisper now." "Oh, Margaret," Julie said with immediate understanding and sympathy. 40 years of making music with others. What an incredible gift you've given to your community. Margaret took a visible breath, and suddenly the energy in the studio shifted dramatically. The comfortable conversation about career achievements and artistic legacy was about to become something much more personal, much more devastating. "Miss Andrews," Margaret began, her voice gaining strength through her emotion. "When I heard about your surgery, about how it took your singing voice, I felt like someone else understood what I'm going through now, but I need to ask you something that's been keeping me awake at night." The studio fell completely silent. This wasn't just a fan sharing appreciation. This was someone in crisis reaching out for wisdom about surviving the loss of fundamental identity. "I don't know who I am without my voice," Margaret continued, tears now flowing freely. "For 70 years, I've been the woman who could hit high notes, who could lead choirs, who could bring music to life. Now I can barely speak, and I feel like I'm disappearing." Julie sat completely motionless, clearly understanding that this conversation was about to touch the deepest wound of her own experience. "So, I have to ask you," Margaret said, her voice breaking with desperation. "How did you survive it? How do you wake up every day knowing that the thing that made you who you are is gone forever? Because I don't know how to keep living like this." The silence that followed was profound. This wasn't just about vocal cords or singing careers. This was about the fundamental question of identity when the thing that defines you is taken away. Julie stared at Margaret for a long moment, clearly wrestling with memories and emotions that she had kept largely private for over 2 decades. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, more fragile, stripped of all performance. "Margaret," Julie said quietly, "what I'm about to tell you, I've never said publicly in 24 years. Without hesitation, without consulting producers or following any protocol, Julie Andrews stood up from her chair and walked directly into the audience toward Margaret. "My dear," Julie said as she reached Margaret's row, "may I sit with you for a moment?" Margaret nodded through her tears, and the surrounding audience members quietly made space. Julie sat down beside her, both women now facing each other in this profound moment of shared understanding about loss and survival. "To answer your question, Margaret," Julie began, her voice now carrying the weight of decades of hidden pain, "I didn't survive it well. Not at first. For the first 2 years after my surgery, I wanted to die." The studio audience gasped audibly. This was clearly far beyond what anyone had expected to hear from someone who had built a career on bringing lightness and hope to the world. "I would wake up every morning, and for a split second, I'd forget," Julie continued, her voice growing more emotional with each word. "I'd think about the songs I wanted to practice, the melodies running through my head. And then I'd remember that I couldn't make those sounds anymore." Jimmy had left his desk and was now standing at the edge of the stage, clearly recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in its honesty and pain. "My voice wasn't just how I made a living, Margaret," Julie said, looking directly into the older woman's eyes. "It was how I understood myself. When I was happy, I sang. When I was sad, I sang. When I wanted to express love, gratitude, joy, everything came through music." The emotion in her voice was palpable as decades of carefully hidden grief gave way to unexpected vulnerability. "There were nights when I would sit at my piano and try to sing Edelweiss or My Favorite Things," Julie continued, her voice now thick with tears. "Just for myself, just to feel like myself again. But what came out was this broken, raspy sound that didn't belong to the person I thought I was." Margaret was nodding knowingly, clearly understanding this exact experience of betrayal by your own body. "And the worst part, Margaret," Julie said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small, worn songbook, "was that the music was still in my head. The melodies, the harmonies, all the songs I'd ever loved. They were all still there, but I couldn't share them anymore." She placed the songbook in Margaret's hands. "This was my practice book from The Sound of Music. I've carried it with me every day for 24 years, not because I can use it, but because it reminds me that music exists even when I can't make it." The studio was completely silent, except for the soft sounds of people being moved to tears by this unexpected revelation. "But here's what I learned, Margaret," Julie continued, her voice now filled with hard-won wisdom mixed with ongoing grief. "I learned that identity isn't just about what you can do. It's about what you've given to others. The audience began to stir with recognition, but Julie held up her hand gently. Every child who ever sang Do Re Mi carries a piece of my voice with them, Julie said, her own voice growing stronger. Every person who found comfort in my favorite things during a difficult time has my voice living in their memory. Margaret was crying openly now, but her tears seemed different. Not just grief, but a kind of desperate hope. And Margaret, Julie concluded, every choir member you directed, every person who learned to love music because you taught them, your voice lives in their voices. We don't stop being musicians when our instruments break. We become the music we've already made. Jimmy, his voice thick with emotion, addressed both women. This is extraordinary. You're talking about finding meaning after losing the thing that gave your life meaning. That's profound wisdom born from real suffering. But Julie wasn't finished. She began removing her lavender blouse, revealing a simple white sweater underneath. Margaret, she said, draping the blouse over the woman's shoulders, this blouse has been with me through interviews, where I pretended that losing my voice wasn't the end of the world. Tonight, it goes home with someone who understands that grieving what we've lost doesn't mean we can't find new ways to live. Margaret, now wearing Julie's expensive blouse, looked somehow comforted, not healed from her loss, but less alone in her grief. And Margaret, Julie continued, I want you to know that every day I wake up and choose to find meaning in what I can still do rather than mourning what I can't. Some days that choice is easy, some days it feels impossible, but every day I make it. She turned to address the cameras directly. To anyone watching who's lost something that defined them, your voice, your mobility, your memory, your role in life. You're not just what you used to be able to do. You're every life you've touched, every moment of beauty you've created, every person who's been changed by knowing you. The show ended differently that night. No standard closing monologue, no promotional segments. Just Julie and Jimmy sitting with Margaret as the credits rolled. Three people connected by the understanding that sometimes survival isn't about moving on from loss, but about learning to carry it with grace. When the episode aired 2 weeks later, it became one of the most watched Tonight Show segments in the show's history. The hashtag, Jean-Julie Andrews' voice, trended globally as millions of viewers shared their own stories of identity loss and the search for meaning after devastating change. Margaret became an unexpected advocate for people coping with age-related voice changes and identity loss, speaking at senior centers about finding purpose beyond past abilities. She always wore Julie's blouse to these appearances. Julie never spoke publicly about changing her approach to discussing her voice loss, but those close to her noticed something different. In subsequent interviews, she began acknowledging more openly the ongoing nature of grief and the importance of community support during major life transitions. And every time someone told Julie that her voice had shaped their childhood, she thought about Margaret Thompson and the night she finally admitted that losing your voice doesn't mean losing your song. Sometimes it just means learning to hear it in different places.